Welcome to the Classroom Assessment Toolkit Training, Module 3.1, Introduction to Formative Assessment. In this presentation for Module 3.1, you'll be provided with an overview of formative assessment, best practices in formative assessment, and you'll get a brief introduction to the Classroom Assessment Toolkit. We hope you enjoy the session. There are different types of assessment: diagnostic, needs, summative, and formative. In the BC Link context, learners are given a diagnostic assessment when they go to the assessment center for testing, where they are given the CLB-PT. When learners enter their class, the instructor will spend some time doing needs assessment to find out about their backgrounds, what competencies they need to work on, and topics they need to learn as a priority. Summative assessment usually comes at the end of a period of study. In this presentation, we will focus on formative assessment. Take a moment to think about formative assessment. What is it? How does it look in a language classroom? What is the purpose of it? If you need to, pause the presentation here to give yourself time to think. Formative assessment is an ongoing, integrated part of the teaching cycle. It provides feedback to both instructors and learners about how the learners are progressing at mastering competencies and about how well the instructor's methods of instruction are working in the classroom. Formative assessment highlights learners' achievements and lets them know the areas they need to improve. Formative assessment also assists the instructor in planning future lessons and revising their teaching strategies. Formative assessment is important in the language classroom because learners have a chance to practice CLB competencies in different contexts or topics. For example, reading a business text for a recreation center can be quite different from reading a business text for a restaurant. Both are using the same competency, but in different contexts. It also provides learners with an opportunity to demonstrate their ability with the various CLB competencies. Instructors need to have evidence of their learners' proficiency of the competencies, and by incorporating formative assessment, instructors will have documented results of that demonstration. Ultimately, instructors need data to see how learners are learning and teachers are teaching. Without any concrete feedback, the instructor and the learners could be lost in the class without any clear direction or. How can you incorporate formative assessment into your classroom? Incorporating formative assessment into the classroom is quite easy. The best way is to incorporate it into regular classroom practice. Simply add an assessment component to some of the activities done in class. Of course, the instructor will need to plan to ensure she is implementing assessment for specific tasks. There needs to be some thoughtful consideration to ensure that all competency areas are addressed over a period of time. Most importantly, the instructor needs to use authentic task-based activities for the assessments. The focus should be on authentic tasks that are valued in the real world, as this is the focus of both the Settlement Language Classroom and the CLBs. What to assess? The CLBs are the foundation that informs both our language instruction and the development of assessment tools. As such, the tests that learners complete should focus on the demonstration of CLB competencies. Once you have identified the task or activity, then the criteria should be developed. The criteria should reflect what is important to complete the task. For example, grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, legibility, registrar, etc. It is important to remember that the lower benchmarks have a decreased demand in terms of the performance conditions. Therefore, when choosing or developing assessments, the lower the benchmark, the fewer the criteria that should be included. There is a plethora of tools available for instructors to choose to use for their formative assessments. Each tool provides different benefits. For example, ease of use, learner friendliness, rich detailed data, a quick snapshot, and so on. Formative assessment tools include anecdotal records, buddy journals, can-do checklists, comments charts, journals, learning logs, observations, peer assessments, performance samples, quizzes, rubrics, scales, score record sheets, self-assessments, surveys, and verbal comments. Descriptions of these various tools can be found in the Classroom Assessment Toolkit. How can you create or adapt your own formative assessment tools? Choose a task that will enable the learners to demonstrate a CLB competency you want to assess. The task or text, listening or reading, need to meet the performance conditions of the benchmark the learners are working on. Choose an appropriate tool to fit the task, the learners, and your time. List the criteria you want the learners to demonstrate or work with your class to create that list once they're familiar with the CLB competencies. Create your tool and ensure you have supplies available to complete the assessment. For example, sticky notes, index cards, smiley face stickers, and so on. When planning for assessment and creating your tools, be sure to employ multiple measures to address different learning styles that may be present in the classroom. You can learn more about adapting tools in the Moodle course 3.3 using the Classroom Assessment Toolkit. How do you implement formative assessment in your classroom? Identify the purpose of the assessment. Make sure it is clear to both you and the learners the reasons why you are completing this assessment. Inform the learners that you, their peers, or the learners themselves will be looking at how well they perform the task. Go over the tool with them to make sure that they are familiar with the performance conditions and the criteria that they will be marked against. Whenever possible, ensure that learners are provided with an exemplar of speaking or writing, or an example of a listening or reading text that they should be able to understand. If doing peer assessments, review with the class how to provide appropriate feedback in a kind and gentle way. Familiarize your learners with the CLB competencies. Part of formative assessment is helping the learners understand what they can already do and where they need to go with their learning. In our linked classrooms, the CLBs are the foundation of our instruction and assessment, so the learners need to be familiar with the competencies and what they need to demonstrate in class in order to progress to the next level. Whenever possible, take the opportunity to share, explain, and go over the can-do checklist with the learners. It will provide them an opportunity to take control of their learning. Encourage learners to become more self-directed. To encourage and prepare learners to be more self-directed and in control of their learning, the instructor can implement self-assessment practices into their assessment routines. For more information about learner self-assessment, please refer to the Classroom Assessment Toolkit available on the Listen website as well as Tutela and in Moodle Course 3.2, which focuses on learner self-assessment. How can we help learners to become more inform the learners of the performance conditions? For example, the amount of time to complete the task, the number of times they can listen to a listening task, the length of the text they need to produce, the length of the text they need to read. Share and familiarize learners with the assessment criteria, and share exemplars of speaking or writing, or provide a sample of the listening and reading that learners should be able to understand. How do you provide feedback? Make sure your comments to learners use language informed by the CLBs, the language from the rubric or checklist, and are linked to the learning outcomes. Ensure that the comments are level appropriate for your learners. The comments should be evidence-based so that learners can clearly see the link between their performance and the feedback they are receiving. Keeping track of formative assessment data. It is extremely helpful to record the results of the data collected systematically over time so that both you and the learners can see the changes in their performance. The assessments need to be integrated and ongoing, a regular classroom routine. The data is needed to see how learners are learning and how teachers are teaching. Instructors need to keep track of the competencies that have been worked on and mastered, see which competencies learners have demonstrated in class, and also which competencies learners still need to work on and which need to be revisited. Ways of tracking data include assessment logs, binders, file folders, and wall pocket charts. With the advent of PBLA, the Language Companion is the primary repository for assessment artifacts in the LINC community. How often should you incorporate formative assessment into your classroom practice? Ideally, you should plan to do 1 to 2 assessments each week. This should provide enough opportunity to collect data on all of the competencies in each of the skill areas over a reasonable period of time. This frequency should also be manageable for you, the instructor, while providing sufficient feedback to the learners. As learners become more familiar with the CLBs, they can begin to establish the assessment criteria, the performance conditions, and the procedures to complete the task. Not only will they be active participants in their learning, but they will also be more competent and confident in assessing their own learning. Thinking about what you've covered thus far in the module, take a moment to ponder. What new learning really stood out for you? What are you most excited about trying in your classroom? There will be an opportunity to share your reflections on the Moodle forum for this course. This concludes the Introduction to Formative Assessment session. As a Link instructor, you should now have a much better understanding of what formative assessment is and how to incorporate it into your classroom. We hope this presentation has been informative and has made formative assessment more accessible. Thank you for watching.